puppies were hugging for the last time before being put down, when suddenly, the vet screamed, "Stop now!" What looked like a routine moment in a small-town shelter turned into something no one expected. A kennel worker, often ignored by everyone around her, finds herself staring at two terrified puppies about to lose everything. But the vet's shocking outburst doesn't just save their lives. It unleashes a storm of secrets and danger hidden behind those locked doors. Why were these puppies really scheduled for death? What dark truth is lurking in the shadows of the shelter? And how far will someone go to silence the only people brave enough to stand in the way? When innocence becomes evidence and compassion becomes a weapon, the fight for the truth will come. At a price. So the question is, can courage alone save lives when powerful forces want them gone forever? This space is built on something simple and enduring: the power of love, the truth in kindness, and the belief that quiet care can still change lives. The morning sun filtered through the dusty windows of the Ohio Valley Animal Shelter, casting long shadows across the concrete floors. Carmen Delaney moved methodically between the kennels, her auburn hair tied back in a practical ponytail as she went about her morning cleaning routine. The familiar sounds and smells of the shelter surrounded her, the gentle whimpers of dogs, the swoosh of water as she rinsed kennels, and the lingering scent of disinfectant. "Good morning, sweetie," she cooed, reaching through the bars to scratch behind the ears of an elderly retriever. The dog's tail thumped against the floor in response. These quiet moments were why she loved her job, even if others couldn't understand. Just yesterday, her sister had called to ask again when Carmen was going to get a real career. The memory made her shoulders tense. "You never aimed higher," her sister had said, the words stinging even in recollection. Carmen pushed the thought away and focused on her tasks. As she approached the isolation ward, her heart skipped a beat. The two mixed-breed puppies huddled together in the corner of their kennel, their floppy ears and big brown eyes making them look even more vulnerable. They were inseparable siblings found abandoned last week. Carmen had been secretly hoping someone would adopt them together. Her stomach dropped when she saw the red tag on their kennel door, scheduled for euthanasia. Today's date was written in Dr. Pierce's precise handwriting. "No," she whispered, her hand trembling as she reached for the tag. The puppies pressed closer together, sensing her distress. One of them whimpered softly, and Carmen felt tears welling up in her eyes. She knew Dr. Pierce's reputation for quick euthanasia decisions, especially with strays that might expose certain breeding operations in the area. Through the window, she saw Dr. Pierce entering the prep room, his pristine white lab coat almost gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He moved with the confident stride of someone used to having his authority unquestioned. Carmen's heart raced as she watched him prepare the supplies with mechanical efficiency. Before she could think better of it, Carmen slipped into the observation area adjacent to the prep room. She pressed herself against the wall, trying to make herself invisible as she watched through the window. An assistant brought in the puppies, placing them on the cold metal table. They huddled together, trembling, their paws scrabbling against the slick surface as they tried to stay close to each other. Dr. Pierce's face was impassive as he prepared the needle, his gray hair catching the harsh overhead light. The seconds seemed to stretch into hours as Carmen watched, her hands pressed against her mouth to keep from crying out. She wanted to burst in, to stop it, but years of conditioning to respect authority held her in place. The needle moved closer to the first puppy. Carmen's heart felt like it would explode in her chest. The puppy let out a small whimper, pressing closer to its sibling. "Stop now." The commanding voice shattered the silence like a thunderclap. Dr. Elias Harrington burst through the prep room door, his tall frame filling the doorway. His scrubs were slightly rumpled, but his expression was fierce and determined. Carmen had only seen the new visiting vet in passing, but in this moment, he seemed larger than life. Dr. Pierce's hand jerked away from the puppies, his face flushing with anger. "Dr. Harrington, this is not your jurisdiction. These animals have been properly scheduled for. I've reviewed their files." Elias cut him off, striding forward. "There's no medical reason for euthanasia. They're healthy, young, and adoptable." His voice was calm, but carried an edge of steel that made even Dr. Pierce take a step back. The puppies had stopped trembling, their eyes fixed on Elias as if sensing a protector. Carmen found herself holding her breath, her fingers pressed against the glass of the observation window. "As head veterinarian, I make the final decisions about," Dr. Pierce began, his voice rising. "As a licensed veterinarian in this state," Elias interrupted again, "I have the authority to question any euthanasia decision I believe to be unethical. Would you like to take this up with the state board?" The threat hung in the air. Carmen watched as Dr. Pierce's face went from red to white. His hands clenched at his sides, but she could see the calculation in his eyes. Finally, he set the needle down with deliberate slowness. "Fine," he said, his voice tight with suppressed rage. "But this isn't over, Dr. Harrington. You're only here temporarily, after all." With that, he turned on his heel and stormed out, his lab coat swishing behind him. Elias immediately moved to the puppies, his hands gentle as he checked them over. The siblings responded to his touch, their tails beginning to wag hesitantly. Carmen found herself drawn out of her hiding place, pushed forward by a force stronger than her usual caution. As she entered the prep room, Elias looked up, their eyes met, and Carmen saw the same quiet determination she felt in her own heart, reflected in his gaze. The puppies, sensing another ally, began to wag their tails more enthusiastically. The morning that had started so ordinarily had become the moment. Everything changed. Standing in the stark prep room, with two saved puppies between them, Carmen and Elias shared a look of understanding. The real battle was just beginning, but for now, this small victory filled the room with hope. Dr. Pierce's face turned a deep shade of red as he whirled to face Dr. Harrington. The tension in the sterile prep room crackled like electricity, making Carmen's skin prickle. The two puppies huddled closer together in their cage, trembling. "How dare you burst into my facility and question my authority?" Dr. Pierce's voice echoed off the clinical white walls. His fingers were still wrapped around the unused syringe, knuckles white with anger. "I've run this shelter for 15 years, and I won't have some visiting vet telling me how to do my job." Carmen pressed herself against the wall, trying to make herself as small as possible. Her heart was racing, torn between overwhelming relief for the puppies and genuine fear of what this confrontation might mean for her position at the shelter. Dr. Harrington stood his ground, his tall frame blocking the doorway. His voice was measured but firm. "Protocol requires a thorough health assessment before any euthanasia decision. I've reviewed today's files, and these puppies haven't received proper evaluation. These are necessary procedures." Dr. Pierce spat out the words. He jabbed a finger toward Carmen. "And you, Delaney, I saw that look on your face. Remember your place here. This isn't a job for people who let emotions cloud their judgment." Carmen felt her cheeks burn. She'd worked at the shelter for 3 years, cleaning kennels, feeding animals, and doing her best to make their lives better. But now, watching Dr. Pierce's barely contained fury, she realized how precarious her position really was. "Both of you would do well to remember that interfering with shelter operations could cost you your jobs," Pierce continued, setting down the syringe with deliberate slowness. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have actual work to do." He stormed out, leaving behind a heavy silence. The puppies whimpered softly, and Carmen found herself moving toward their cage without thinking. Dr. Harrington stepped aside to let her pass. "They're okay," she whispered, reaching through the bars to stroke their soft fur. "You're okay now, Miss Delaney?" Dr. Harrington's voice was gentle. "Could we talk for a moment?" Carmen nodded, following him out into the quieter hallway, away from the prep room's harsh fluorescent lights. she could see him more clearly. His kind eyes and salt and pepper hair gave him a trustworthy appearance that put her slightly at ease. "I'm Elias Harrington," he said, extending his hand. "I'll be working here for the next few months as part of a regional veterinary oversight program." Carmen shook his hand, noticing the strength in his grip. "Carmen Delaney, I'm just a kennel assistant." "There's no just about it, Carmen. The work you do here matters." He glanced around before lowering his voice. "How long have you noticed irregularities in the euthanasia schedule?" The question caught her off guard. She'd had concerns for months, but had always pushed them aside, telling herself she was being too sensitive. I'm not sure what you mean." "I think you do." His eyes met hers steadily. "The numbers don't add up. The documentation is incomplete. And I saw your face in there. You knew those puppies didn't need to be put down." Carmen felt something shift inside her chest. For the first time, someone else was voicing the doubts she'd been carrying alone. "They're healthy," she said quietly. "Young, adoptable. I don't understand why they were on today's list." "Neither do I." Elias pulled out a small notebook. "And they're not the first, are they?" Carmen thought about all the time she'd seen Dr. Pierce rush through evaluations, his impatience when she suggested giving animals more time to find homes. "No," she admitted. "They're not." A door slammed somewhere in the building, making Carmen jump. Dr. Pierce's voice carried down the hallway, sharp with irritation as he spoke to someone on the phone. "He doesn't like it when I get too attached to the animals," Carmen said, ringing. Her hands. "Says it makes me inefficient." "Compassion isn't inefficiency, Carmen." Elias's voice was firm. "It's the foundation of what we do here." Something warm bloomed in Carmen's chest, a feeling she gradually recognized as courage. Standing there with Dr. Harrington, she no longer felt like the overlooked kennel assistant who should just keep her head down and follow orders. "Those puppies," she said, straightening her shoulders slightly. "They deserve a chance." Elias smiled, and the warmth in his expression made Carmen feel like she'd finally found an ally in her quiet battle for the shelter's animals. "They do," he agreed. "And we're going to make sure they get it." The sound of approaching footsteps made them both step back. As Dr. Pierce rounded the corner, his sharp gaze fell on them, and Carmen could feel his suspicious assessment. But, for the first time, she didn't shrink under his stare. Instead, she thought of the puppies, safe for now in their cage, and felt a new strength growing within her. "How dare you burst into my facility and question my authority?" Dr. Pierce's voice echoed off the clinical white walls. His finger jabbed toward Elias's chest. "These are necessary procedures. We're overcrowded, and tough decisions have to be made." Carmen pressed herself against the wall, trying to become invisible as the two veterinarians faced off. Her heart was still racing from Elias's dramatic entrance, but Pierce's anger made her stomach twist with fear. "If you can't handle the reality of shelter work," Pierce continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "then maybe you shouldn't be here at all. That goes for both of you." His cold gaze swept over to Carmen, making her flinch. Later, that afternoon, Carmen was restocking supplies when she heard Pierce's voice floating from his office. She paused, recognizing the other voice as Margaret Thornton, a well-known local breeder. "Don't worry about it, Margaret," Pierce was saying. "We always find room for your situations. Just bring them in like usual." Carmen's hand froze on the box of gauze she was holding. This was the third time this month Thornton's puppies had shown up at the shelter, supposedly as strays. Something about the conversation made her skin crawl. When she shared what she'd overheard with Elias in the break room, his face grew serious. "I've seen this before," he said quietly, stirring his coffee. "At my last position in Cincinnati, a vet was working with puppy mills, helping them dispose of excess inventory." His lip curled in disgust at the phrase. "You mean?" Carmen's eyes widened as the pieces started falling into place. The breeder gets rid of puppies that don't meet their standards or aren't selling. The shelter provides a convenient disposal service, masked as legitimate euthanasia. Due to overcrowding, Elias leaned forward. The vet usually gets kickbacks for expediting the process. Carmen felt sick. She thought about all the healthy animals Pierce had fast-tracked for euthanasia over the past few months. The way he always seemed to find room for Thornton's strays, while claiming they were too full to keep others. I started keeping records. Elias continued. Dates, numbers, patterns. But when I tried to report it, he shook his head. The whole system was in on it. I lost my job and nothing changed. Carmen's hands trembled as she wrapped them around her paper cup. What can we do? I can't lose this job, Dr. Harrington. It's all I have. Call me Elias, he said gently. And for now, we watch. We document everything. Build a case that's impossible to ignore. Over the next few days, Carmen began paying closer attention. She noticed how Pierce rushed perfectly healthy animals onto the euthanasia list while Thornton's puppies kept appearing. How he manipulated paperwork to hide the pattern. The shelter's board members seemed to look the other way, more concerned with their donor relationships than animal welfare. Morning rounds, Carmen watched Pierce examine a litter of week-old kittens. Too young, he muttered, making a notation on his clipboard. Schedule them for tomorrow. But Dr. Pierce, Carmen protested before she could stop herself. The rescue group said they'd take them. They just need 2 more days until their foster home is ready. Pierce's eyes narrowed. Did I ask for your opinion, Miss Delaney? Perhaps you'd like to explain to our board why we're over capacity, why we can't accept more animals from our major donors. The threat in his voice was clear. Carmen ducked her head, feeling trapped. She had always known her position was precarious. A high school dropout with no formal training, just a gift for handling animals and a willingness to work hard. Who would believe her word against a respected veterinarian? That evening, as Carmen finished her rounds, she paused at the cage holding the 2 puppies Elias had saved. They wagged their tails at her approach, pressing their wet noses through the bars. How many others had there been that she hadn't been able to save? How many more would there be if she stayed silent? But speaking up could cost her everything. The shelter was all she had, her purpose, her identity. The animals were her family. The thought of losing them made her chest ache. She heard Thornton's expensive car pulling up outside, probably dropping off another stray. Carmen squared her shoulders, took out her phone, and started documenting. Whatever happened next, she couldn't look away anymore. The truth about Pierce's operation needed to come out, no matter the cost. Carmen's hands trembled as she dialed the number Elias had given her. After 3 rings, a gruff voice answered. Hank Mallory speaking. Mr. Mallory? This is Carmen Delaney. From the shelter, Dr. Harrington suggested I call you. She twisted the phone cord around her finger, heart pounding. Ah yes, Elias mentioned you might be reaching out. His voice softened. Been wondering when someone would finally look into that place. Tell me what you need. Carmen glanced over her shoulder, though she was alone in the break room. We're trying to understand some patterns we've noticed. Dr. Pierce's euthanasia numbers don't add up. And there's this connection to a local breeder. Let me stop you right there, Hank interrupted. 3 years ago, when I adopted my Sophie, something felt off about the paperwork. Dates were wrong, signatures didn't match. I tried asking questions, but Pierce shut me down fast. Carmen's chest tightened. Would you be willing to help us gather evidence? Count me in. I've got contacts from my deputy days who might be interested. 2. After hanging up, Carmen hurried to find Elias. He was in the examination room, reviewing files. His face brightened when she entered. Hank's on board? Yes, and he mentioned irregularities in the paperwork from years ago. Carmen lowered her voice. I've started collecting copies of recent documents too. Things that don't match up. Elias, nodded approvingly. Good thinking. We need a safe place to store everything. My locker, Carmen suggested. Pierce never goes near the staff area. He thinks it's beneath him. They spent the next hour developing their plan. Carmen would document suspicious euthanasia orders, while Elias reached out to more former adopters. But their most immediate concern was protecting the two puppies Pierce had nearly killed. We can't leave them in the general population, Elias said, running a hand through his hair. He'll try again. Carmen's face lit up. The isolation ward. I could say they need monitoring for potential parvo exposure. It would give us at least 2 weeks. Moving the puppies required perfect timing. They waited until Pierce left for his lunch break, which he always took at precisely 12:30 in the afternoon. Carmen gathered the necessary paperwork while Elias created a false exposure report. The puppies wagged their tails when Carmen approached their kennel. Hey, sweeties, she whispered, carefully lifting them. Their warm bodies pressed against her chest, trusting and innocent. For the first time in years, she felt truly purposeful. The isolation ward was small but clean, tucked away in a quiet corner of the shelter. Carmen settled the puppies into their new space, making sure they had fresh water and comfortable bedding. Their eyes followed her movements, bright with curiosity. You'll be safe here, she promised, scratching behind their ears. One puppy licked her hand while the other playfully pawed at its sibling. Elias appeared in the doorway. Pierce is back. Early, everything okay in here? All set. Carmen straightened up, smoothing her scrubs. I've marked them as isolation cases in the system. He'd have to override both our medical recommendations to touch them now. Later that afternoon, Carmen felt Pierce's eyes following her as she made her rounds. The weight of his suspicion pressed against her shoulders, but she kept her movements steady, methodical. She had spent so long trying to stay invisible, but now each step felt like an act of defiance. During her evening feeding routine, she overheard Pierce on the phone in his office. His voice carried through the partially open door. Those 2 mutts should have been gone last week, he snapped. Now they're supposedly exposed to parvo. Something's not right here. Carmen's heart raced, but she continued her work without pausing. When she reached the isolation ward, she took extra time with the puppies, watching them romp and play. Their joy was pure, untouched by the darkness surrounding them. Worth it, she whispered, remembering how close they'd come to death. You're worth all of it. That evening, as Carmen prepared to leave, she caught her reflection in the window. The woman staring back seemed different somehow, stronger, more determined. She had spent years believing she was meant to stay in the background, to simply maintain the status quo. Now she was part of something bigger, something that mattered. She checked her locker one last time, ensuring the manila envelope containing their growing evidence was securely hidden behind her spare uniform. The documents inside told a story of corruption that grew clearer with each passing day. Elias met her in the parking lot. Hans's going to introduce us to some of his old colleagues this weekend, he said quietly. People who might be able to help when we're ready to move forward. Carmen nodded, clutching her keys. Pierce is already suspicious about the puppies. Let him be suspicious. Elias's voice was firm. We're doing this by the book. He can't touch them without cause, and we'll make sure he doesn't manufacture any. As Carmen drove home that night, she felt the familiar fear in her stomach, but it was different now, more like anticipation than dread. For the first time in her career at the shelter, she wasn't just taking care of animals. She was fighting for them. The road ahead would be difficult, filled with risks and uncertain outcomes. But as she thought of those 2 puppies, safe in their temporary haven, she knew there was no turning back. She had found her voice, and she intended to use it. The morning sun hadn't yet risen when Dr. Pierce called an emergency staff meeting. Carmen sat in the back of the break room, her stomach tight with worry as Pierce paced at the front, his face dark with anger. Let me be crystal clear, Pierce said. slapping a stack of papers onto the table. Anyone caught accessing confidential records without proper authorization will face immediate termination and legal action. His eyes locked onto Carmen, who fought the urge to shrink in her chair. We have protocols in place for a reason. Elias sat across the room, his jaw clenched. Pierce turned to him next. And Dr. Harrington, as a temporary contractor, your position here is precarious. I'd hate to see your contract review come back unfavorably. The threat hung heavy in the air. Carmen watched Elias's hands curl into fists under the table, but he remained silent. After the meeting, staff members hurried away, avoiding eye contact with both Carmen and Elias. He's scared, Elias whispered to Carmen as they walked toward the kennels. He knows we're onto something. That evening, after most staff had left, Carmen stood before the records room door. Her heart thundered in her chest as she inserted the key she'd borrowed from the cleaning staff. The lock clicked open. Inside, filing cabinets lined the walls. The room smelled of dust and paper. Carmen pulled out her phone's flashlight, careful to keep the beam low. She knew exactly what she was looking for, the intake and euthanasia. Records from the past 6 months. The cabinet creaked as she opened it. Time seemed to crawl as she photographed page after page, her hands shaking slightly. Each document revealed more discrepancies. Healthy animals marked as aggressive, fabricated medical conditions, dates that didn't match. A floorboard groaned. Behind her, Carmen whirled around to find Dr. Pierce filling the doorway, his face hidden in shadow. The light switch clicked and harsh fluorescent light flooded the room. Well, Pierce said, his voice eerily calm. What do we have here? Carmen's phone slipped from her trembling fingers. Dr. Pierce, I was just breaking and entering. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. Just stealing confidential information? His eyes glinted with something that made Carmen's skin crawl. Just trying to destroy everything I've built? She backed away until she hit the filing cabinet. Pierce moved closer, towering over her. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Miss Delaney, no idea at all. His hand shot out, grabbing her wrist painfully. Give me your phone, now. You're hurting me, Carmen gasped, trying to pull away. Her heart raced as she realized how alone they were in the building. The night security guard wouldn't pass by for another hour. The phone, Pierce growled, tightening his grip. And then we're going to have a long discussion about your future here. Carmen's fear suddenly crystallized into anger. All those innocent animals, all the lies, all the cruelty, it had to stop. She jerked her knee up, catching Pierce in the thigh. He stumbled backward, surprised, and she ducked under his arm. Her fingers fumbled with the door handle as Pierce lunged for her. She yanked it open and burst into the hallway, running as fast as she could. Her footsteps echoed off the empty walls as she sprinted toward the exit, Pierce's angry shouts following her. She didn't stop running until she reached her car, hands shaking so badly she could barely get the key in the ignition. As she pulled out of the parking lot, she saw Pierce standing at the shelter entrance, his figure stark against the light behind him. Safe in her apartment, Carmen sat on her bed, still trembling. Her wrist throbbed where Pierce had grabbed her, and she knew there would be bruises tomorrow. But among the fear and shock, another feeling grew stronger. Determination. She pulled out her phone and dialed Elias's number. When he answered, her voice was steady despite her racing heart. Dr. Harrington? I got them. I got the records. She paused, taking a deep breath. And Pierce just showed exactly how far he'll go to keep his secrets. Are you safe? Elias asked, concern evident in his voice. Yes, Carmen replied, touching her tender wrist. But now we know for sure he's dangerous and he's desperate, and that means we're on the right track. The night's events had shaken her, but they had also hardened her resolve. Pierce's violent reaction proved they were close to exposing something big. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, Carmen had what they needed, evidence that could finally bring Pierce's operation crumbling down. The dim fluorescent lights flickered in the shelter's records room as Carmen's trembling fingers sifted through stacks of intake papers. It was nearly midnight, and the building was eerily quiet except for the distant whimpers of dogs in their kennels. She knew she shouldn't be here, but Pierce's earlier threats had only strengthened her resolve. "Here," Elias whispered, sliding another folder across the metal desk. "Look at the intake dates for the past 3 months." Carmen spread out the documents, her heart pounding. The 2 puppies they'd saved, now safely hidden in a makeshift kennel in the shelter's storage area, had arrived 6 weeks ago. According to the official paperwork, they were listed as strays found wandering near the highway. "Something's not right," Carmen murmured, comparing the dates with another set of records. "These vaccination records, they're from Golden Meadows breeding." Elias leaned in closer, his presence reassuring in the shadows. "That's the high-end breeder on the outskirts of town?" "Yes." Carmen's fingers traced the familiar logo on the medical forms. But why would purebred puppies from Golden Meadows end up here as strays? She pulled out her phone and showed Elias the photos she'd taken of the puppies. "Look at their markings. They're clearly mixed breeds. No way they came from a premium breeder." Elias's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "Unless they were mistakes," Carmen finished. "Puppies that didn't meet their breeding standards." They dug deeper into the records, and a disturbing pattern emerged. Every few weeks, stray puppies would appear at the shelter, always with similar timing to large shipments leaving Golden Meadows. And almost all of them ended up on Pierce's euthanasia list within days. "He's helping them dispose of their unwanted puppies," Carmen whispered, horror creeping into her voice. "The ones that would damage their reputation for perfect purebreds." Elias pulled out his notebook, jotting down dates and numbers. "And in exchange, I bet he's getting kickbacks." Notice how the shelter's supply budget increased right after these incidents? Carmen's hands shook as she found more connections. The 2 puppies they'd saved weren't random victims of overcrowding. They were living proof of Pierce's arrangement with Golden Meadows. Their very existence threatened to expose years of illegal dealings. "That's why he was so desperate to put them down," she said, her voice breaking. "Their evidence. Mixed breeds from a breeder that claims to produce only purebred champions." The weight of this revelation settled over them both. What had started as an effort to save 2 innocent lives had uncovered something far more sinister, a systematic scheme of deception and cruelty. "We have to document everything," Elias said urgently, reaching for his phone to photograph the records. "Pierce could destroy these files at any moment." Carmen nodded, her earlier fear transforming into determination. "Those puppies aren't just 2 lives we saved anymore. They're proof of everything he's done." As they carefully photographed each damning document, Carmen heard a sound that made her blood run cold. Footsteps in the hallway. The heavy tread was unmistakable. "Pierce," she mouthed silently to Elias. They scrambled to replace the files, but the footsteps were getting closer. Elias quickly shut off his phone's flashlight, plunging them into darkness except for the thin strip of light under the door. The handle turned. Carmen's heart nearly stopped as Dr. Pierce's imposing figure filled the doorway. The overhead lights snapped on, harsh and revealing. Well, Pierce's voice was deadly quiet. "What do we have here?" Carmen felt trapped, her back pressed against the filing cabinet. But as Pierce advanced into the room, something had changed inside her. This wasn't just about her job anymore, or even about 2 puppies. This was about years of corruption, dozens of innocent animals, and a system that needed to be exposed. "We know what you've been doing with Golden Meadows," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "Those puppies you tried to euthanize, they're proof of your deals." Pierce's face contorted with rage. He moved forward, backing Carmen into a corner. "You have no idea what you're talking about. And after tonight, you'll never work with animals again. I'll make sure of it." Elias stepped between them. Back off, Pierce. We have copies of everything. But Pierce's fury had transformed into something dangerous. He knocked a stack of files off the desk, sending papers flying. You think anyone will believe you? A nobody kennel cleaner and a temporary vet? Carmen saw her chance as Pierce focused on Elias. She darted past him toward the door, her heart hammering. Pierce lunged for her arm, but she twisted away, nearly stumbling in her haste. She ran through the dark hallway, hearing Pierce's angry footsteps behind her. The exit sign glowed like a beacon ahead. She burst through the door into the cool night air, not stopping until she reached her car, safe inside her locked vehicle. Hands shaking on the steering wheel, Carmen took deep breaths to steady herself. Minutes later, Elias emerged from the building, hurrying to his own car. They'd gotten what they needed, proof of Pierce's corruption. But the cost of this knowledge was clear. There would be no going back to simply caring for the shelter. Animals. They were now in a fight to expose a system that treated living creatures as disposable commodities. Carmen looked at the photos on her phone. Documentation of Pierce's deals with Golden Meadows. The evidence of countless animals discarded. To protect a breeder's reputation. The 2 puppies they'd saved were more than survivors now. They were symbols of hope, proof that standing up against cruelty was worth every risk. The morning sun streamed through the shelter, windows as Carmen and Elias huddled over his laptop in the break room. Their earlier discovery had changed everything. And now they needed a plan that would expose Pierce's corruption once and for all. The county board hearing is scheduled for next Tuesday, Elias said, pulling up the official notice on his screen. That's our chance to present all the evidence. Carmen nodded, spreading out their collected documents on the table. We have the photographs of the records, the euthanasia reports that don't match the intake numbers, and the financial records showing the suspicious payments. But our strongest evidence, Elias smiled, is currently sleeping in your office. The 2 puppies had become more than just animals to save. They were now the key to unveiling Pierce's whole operation. Carmen had been keeping them hidden in a makeshift pen behind her desk, away from Pierce's watchful eyes. We'll bring them to the hearing, Carmen said, her voice growing stronger with conviction. Living proof that Golden Meadows is lying about their breeding program. Elias reached across the table, briefly touching her hand. You've come so far from the quiet kennel assistant I met that first day. You know that, right? Carmen felt warmth spread across her cheeks. These past weeks, she'd noticed how his presence made her heart beat faster, how his support had given her strength she never knew she had. I couldn't have done any of this without you, she replied softly. They spent the next hour organizing their evidence into a compelling presentation. Carmen carefully labeled each document while Elias prepared a timeline of Pierce's suspicious activities. We need to make copies of everything, Elias insisted. Multiple copies, stored in different locations. Pierce might try to destroy the evidence before the hearing. Carmen agreed, remembering their close call in the records room. I'll keep one set at home, one in my car, and one with my friend Sarah, who works at the library. As they worked, Elias shared stories from his previous veterinary positions, where he'd seen similar patterns of corruption. But I've never had someone as brave as you working with me before, he added, his eyes meeting hers with unmistakable admiration. Carmen felt herself blushing again. This was different from the way anyone had ever looked at her before, not as the simple shelter worker who never aimed higher, but as someone worthy of respect and maybe something more. They created a detailed schedule for the hearing day. I'll bring the puppies in last, Carmen suggested, for maximum impact. After we present all the documentation, we'll show the board living proof of what's been happening. Perfect, Elias agreed. Pierce won't be able to deny anything with those 2 staring him in the face. Their planning was interrupted by the sound of the shelter door opening. Carmen quickly gathered their papers while Elias closed his laptop. Through the break room window, they watched Pierce stride past, his face dark with suspicious anger. He knows we're up to something, Carmen whispered. Let him worry, Elias replied with quiet confidence. We have truth on our side. Later that afternoon, Carmen visited the puppies in her office. They had grown stronger and more playful, no longer the trembling creatures she'd first saved. As she watched them tumble over each other, she felt a surge of pride and purpose. You two are going to help us change everything, she told them softly. No more secret deals, no more unnecessary deaths. When Elias joined her, they spent time preparing the puppies for their public debut. The siblings would need to be calm and well-behaved at the hearing. They're perfect, Elias said, scratching behind their ears. Just like their protector. Carmen looked up to find him watching her with that same warm admiration. For the first time since this all began, she felt truly confident. They had the evidence, they had a plan, and most importantly, they had each other. Together, they finalized the last details of their presentation. The county hearing would be their chance to expose years of corruption and save countless animal lives. As they gathered their materials to leave for the day, both felt the weight and hope of what lay ahead. The puppies curled up together in their pen, peaceful and unaware of their important role in the coming days. Carmen and Elias shared one last look of determination before parting ways. Pierce's downfall was within reach, and justice would finally be served. The county hearing had gone exactly as planned. Carmen's testimony was clear and compelling, the evidence damning. When Elias brought in the puppies, gasps echoed through the chamber. Even the most skeptical board members couldn't ignore the living proof of Pierce's deception. As they left the courthouse, Carmen felt lighter than air, clutching the puppies' leashes while Elias carried their documentation. We did it, she breathed, still hardly believing their success. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as they loaded the puppies into Elias's car. The siblings immediately curled up together in their carrier on the back seat, worn out from their big performance. Let's take the scenic route home, Elias suggested, pulling onto the winding road that followed the river. We deserve to enjoy this moment. Carmen settled into the passenger seat, watching the golden light filter through the trees. The road curved gently alongside the water, peaceful and empty. They were discussing plans for reforming the shelter when bright headlights suddenly filled the rearview mirror. That car's coming up fast, Carmen said, her earlier peace evaporating. The vehicle behind them was gaining speed, its high beams blazing. Elias gripped the steering wheel tighter. Hold on, he warned, just as the other car slammed into their rear bumper. The impact jolted them forward, and the puppies yelped in fear. The attacking vehicle swerved out, pulling alongside them. Through the window, Carmen caught a glimpse of a familiar face, one of Pierce's regular contractors who often helped transport animals. Her blood ran cold as he jerked his wheel toward them. Metal screamed against metal as their car was forced toward the guardrail. Elias fought for control, but their attacker struck again. The steering wheel spun wildly in Elias's hands as their vehicle broke through the barrier. Time seemed to slow as they went airborne. Carmen's stomach lurched as the car tilted nose down toward the ravine. The puppies' terrified whimpers filled her ears as they began to tumble. The first impact threw them forward, against their seatbelts. The car rolled once, twice before coming to rest on its side, precariously balanced on a rocky outcrop above the water. The engine sputtered and died. Carmen? Elias's voice was tight with pain. Are you okay? Yes, she managed, tasting blood from where she'd bitten her lip. The puppies. A horrible creaking sound cut through the air. The car shifted slightly. Metal groaning. We need to get out now, Elias said urgently. The car's not stable. Carmen twisted in her seat, reaching for the carrier in the back. The puppies were pressed together, shaking but alive. The carrier's door had sprung open in the crash. "I'll help you first," Elias said, already working to free himself. "Then you can help me with the puppies." The windshield was cracked but intact. Elias managed to force his door open upward, since they were lying on the passenger side. The car groaned again with his movement. "Come on," he urged, reaching for Carmen. She grabbed his hand, and he pulled her up through his door. The rocks beneath the car shifted ominously. "The puppies," Carmen gasped, leaning back in. The siblings were huddled together, too frightened to move. "Come here, babies," she called softly, trying to keep her voice steady despite her terror. First puppy crept forward, and she snatched it up, passing it to Elias. As she reached for the second one, the car lurched. The remaining puppy yelped, scrambling toward her hands. "Now!" Elias shouted. Carmen grabbed the puppy and threw herself backward just as the car broke free. They scrambled up the rocky slope, clutching the dogs as their vehicle tumbled down. Into the water below, landing with a tremendous splash, they collapsed on the grass above the ravine, breathing heavily. The puppies squirmed in their arms, whimpering and licking their faces. In the distance, they could hear the sound of their attacker's car speeding away. "Pierce," Carmen said, her voice shaking with anger and leftover fear. "He tried to kill us." Elias pulled her close, careful of the puppy she was still holding. "He failed," he said firmly. "And now we know just how far he'll go to protect himself." They sat there in the growing darkness, holding each other and the trembling puppies, watching the last bubbles rise from where their car had disappeared into the river. Their victory at the hearing felt hollow now, overshadowed by this brutal reminder of what they were really up against. The midnight air felt heavy as Carmen and Elias trudged along the dark road, their clothes still damp from the crash. Each step seemed to drain what little energy Carmen had left. The puppy in her arms had finally stopped trembling, but her own hands wouldn't stay steady. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered, her voice breaking. They'd reached a small clearing where a fallen log offered a chance to rest. "Pierce isn't just breaking rules. He's willing to kill for this. What chance do we have against someone like that?" Elias gently set his puppy down beside its sibling and turned to face her. In the dim moonlight, she could see the scratches on his face from the crash, making him look as battered as she felt. "Carmen, look at these two," he said softly, gesturing to the puppies who were now curled together on the grass. "They're alive because of you. Not just because you helped save them that first day, but because you kept fighting for them. Your compassion didn't just give them life, it gave them a future." She looked down at the puppies, remembering how they'd trembled in the prep room that first morning. But compassion isn't enough against someone who has no conscience. Pierce has money, connections, and he's willing to do anything to stop us. "That's exactly why we can't give up," Elias insisted, taking her hands in his. "Your compassion isn't weakness, it's your greatest strength. It's what made you notice the wrong things happening in the first place. It's what gave you the courage to stand up when everyone else looked away." Carmen felt tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm just a kennel assistant. Nobody even noticed me before all this." "You're wrong," Elias said firmly. "You're the person who refused to let cruelty win. You're the one who showed me that one person's conviction can make a real difference. Pierce may have power, but you have something he'll never understand. Genuine care for these animals." As if to emphasize his point, one of the puppies padded over and pressed against Carmen's leg, looking up at her with trusting eyes. The simple gesture sent warmth through her chest, melting some of the fear that had frozen her heart. "We need help," she said finally, her mind starting to work again. "We can't fight Pierce alone anymore." "Hank," Elias suggested, referring to the retired deputy. "He still has connections with law enforcement." And he mentioned knowing someone at the Pende state level. Carmen nodded slowly, hope flickering back to life. "The state inspectors, they have the authority to investigate the shelter without warning. If they caught Pierce in the act." "Exactly," Elias said, squeezing her hands. We don't have to fight Pierce on his terms. We just need to get the right people looking in the right places. They made their way to Hank's house, the elderly man answering his door despite the late hour. His eyes widened at their bedraggled appearance, but he quickly ushered them inside. Good Lord, what happened to you two? He asked, but then held up his hand. No, wait. Let me get you some coffee first. Over steaming mugs, they told him everything. The hearing, the ambush, the crash. Hank's weathered face grew darker with each detail. Pierce has gone too far, he said grimly. But you're right about the state inspectors. My old partner works with them now. Give me an hour. While Hank made calls from his study, Carmen sat on his worn couch, the puppies finally sleeping beside her. Elias brought her a blanket, and she realized she was still shivering slightly. Whatever happens next, she said quietly. Thank you for believing in me. Elias smiled, the warmth reaching his eyes. You made it easy. You showed me what real courage looks like. Hank returned, his expression determined. It's arranged. The state inspection team will be here first thing tomorrow morning. They're bringing investigators who specialize in shelter fraud. Pierce won't have time to hide anything. Carmen took a deep breath, feeling strength return to her tired body. This was their chance, perhaps their last one, but a real opportunity to expose everything Pierce had done. We'll need to be ready, she said, her voice stronger now. We know where he keeps the real records, and which kennels show the evidence of overcrowding. We can guide them right to what they need to see. Hank nodded approvingly. That's the spirit, girl. Pierce may think he's untouchable, but he's never faced someone with your determination. As they planned their approach for the morning, Carmen felt the last of her despair fade away. Yes, Pierce had money and influence. Yes, he'd shown how far he would go to protect his scheme. But she had something he could never buy or intimidate, a genuine love for the animals in her care, and the determination to see justice done. Tomorrow would bring their final confrontation with Pierce, but this time they wouldn't face him alone. Carmen looked at the sleeping puppies, living proof of both Pierce's cruelty and her own resilience. She was ready for whatever came next. Carmen stood before the state inspectors, her heart pounding but her voice steady as she presented the damning evidence. The two puppies sat alertly beside her, living proof of Pierce's corruption. Spread across the conference table were stacks of records she'd painstakingly gathered, forms showing healthy animals marked for death, secret payments from the breeder, and falsified euthanasia reports. These puppies were scheduled for immediate euthanasia despite being perfectly healthy, Carmen explained, reaching down to stroke their soft fur. They came from Elite Breeding Services, the same facility that has mysteriously been sending dozens of dogs here over the past year. The lead inspector, a stern woman named Miss Thompson, studied the documents with narrowed eyes. And you're certain about the connection between Dr. Pierce and this breeder? The payment records are right there, Elias added, pointing to a series of checks, along with proof that Pierce was destroying evidence of perfectly adoptable animals to cover up the breeder's improper disposal of unwanted inventory. A crash from the hallway made everyone jump. Through the glass wall, they saw Pierce running toward the exit, knocking over a cart of supplies in his panic. But Elias was faster. He bolted through the door and cut across through a side corridor, emerging right in Pierce's path. It's over, Elias said firmly, blocking the doorway with his broad shoulders. Face what you've done. Pierce tried to shove past him, but Elias held firm. Two police officers who had accompanied the inspection team quickly moved in, securing Pierce's hands behind his back as he struggled. You can't prove anything. Pierce spat, his composed professional demeanor completely shattered. It's all lies from a nobody kennel cleaner and a temporary hire. Carmen watched as they led him away, feeling a complex mix of triumph and sadness. This place had been her whole world for so long, And while Pierce's cruelty had tainted it, she had also found her strength here. Ms. Thompson approached her, looking impressed. Ms. Delaney, your thorough documentation and courage in coming forward have likely saved countless animals. We'll need your continued cooperation as this case moves forward. Of course, Carmen nodded. Whatever you need. As the inspection team began boxing up evidence, Carmen found herself drawn to the two puppies who had started it all. They wagged their tails, pressing against her legs as if sensing her emotional state. You know, Elias said, coming to stand beside her, these two still need a permanent home. Carmen felt tears welling up in her eyes as she knelt to embrace the puppies. I think they already found one, she said softly. They've been my strength through all of this. I couldn't bear to let them go now. I had a feeling you'd say that. Elias smiled, his eyes warm with affection. You've shown everyone who underestimated you exactly what you're made of, Carmen. Including me. The shelter would need rebuilding, new leadership, new policies, new trust with the community. But as Carmen gathered her belongings and signed the adoption papers for her two new family members, she felt ready for whatever came next. Elias held the door as she walked out into the bright afternoon sunshine, a puppy tucked under each arm. The fresh air felt like freedom, like a new beginning. When he fell into step beside her, his hand finding hers, Carmen realized she'd gained far more than justice. She'd found her voice, her purpose, and someone who saw her true worth from the very start. The puppy squirmed happily in her arms, no longer the terrified creature she'd first saved from Pierce's needle. Like her, they had transformed, from overlooked and endangered to cherished and strong. As they walked together toward the parking lot, Carmen knew that while one chapter was ending, something even better was just beginning. If something today spoke to the part of you that still believes in love, stay a while. Subscribe. I'll be here again tomorrow with another story worth feeling.